Good morning, everybody. My name's Councillor Kate Revilius. Welcome to this decision session. I'm Executive Member for Transport. So the agenda today, it's Tuesday, the 8th of October. First of all, any declarations of interest? I have no declarations of interest. The minutes from the last meeting on the 19th of July, I have read and I am happy with. Do I just sign at the end here? Yeah. And then we come to public participation. So I have got 5 people in the room and I've had 1 written representation, which I've read. So I'd like to invite Councillor Whitcroft up first to speak on item 4, which is Res Park, zone R66.
Thank you for having me here today, Councillor Revilius. As the ward councillor for Fishergate, which includes the R66 Road group, commonly known as the Redfern area, I'm passionately in favour of introducing residence parking, and I urge you to fully approve the implementation of permit parking across this entire area in question. I'm well aware of the parking problems that persist in this area. I was previously a resident of Willis Street myself, where I witnessed the daily struggle that local residents had in trying to park near their own home. Since I became a councillor in 2023, this issue has gotten worse. Residents from across the neighbourhood email me regularly to express their worry about the state of parking on their street. I welcome the special effort that was made to bring in an area review of Res Park rather than the usual agonisingly slow street-by-street approval system that leaves residents waiting for years for what they need now. It was with dismay that I note that the petition for Res Park in this area was first issued in 2019. What hope is there for residents across the city if we take so slowly to implement what amounts to a basic right, being able to access your own home from your car? In my capacity as ward councillor, I have received a number of heartrending stories from Redfern residents who live on these streets that have essentially become a free car park for visitors to the city. People cannot get to their elderly parents close enough to the door to visit. Disabled residents are forced to park far away from where they live, and even non-motorists such as cyclists and pedestrians are often unable to use the pavements due to mass parking. My defence of Res Park and support for approval does not rest on my residents alone, although of course they are an important part of it. It is my informed opinion that the more residents parking is a general good for the city as a whole. If we bring Res Park into Redfern, we will no longer have free parking for visitors to our beautiful city. Instead, such visitors will have to pay for parking at nearby car parks, or use the park and ride service, or use public transport. In short, Res Park means York will be able to have a less logjammed and polluted city, with car usage rightly reserved for those who need it, those that live here. You may be aware that at the last full council meeting, I introduced a motion on reforming residence parking and calling for a city-wide review. I'm proud to say that it was passed by our councillors. This review in front of us of the whole of R66 provides a basis for a wider plan. In addition, I'm glad the report acknowledges that the issue of creeping Res Park, which on current street-by-street approval system can contribute to parking problems by pushing cars towards fewer and fewer free parking spots. I'm disappointed, therefore, that this report has recommended doing nothing for the same street-by-street reason that this whole review was originally set out to alter. Once again, the archaic and restrictive 50% turnout rule threatens to scupper another desperately needed parking control. Well, not on my watch. I know that there is an argument for local consultation on a range of issues. Indeed, we've done this extensively on the local transport strategy. To reject this request on the grounds that it doesn't meet an arbitrary limit is a total abdication of the council's responsibility to its residents and local transport needs. As councillors, we have a democratic mandate to make the right decisions for our residents. Res Park in Redfern has the support of both ward councillors. Councillor Wilson sends her regards. And with the support of the democratically elected executive member, we must use the powers we have to help the people. Councillor Revilius, I'm proud of the work you've done as the executive member for transport. You've proven an astute and compassionate leader. You've an open mind to ideas from your fellow councillors and from fellow residents on how to make the city's transport system work for the better. I know my relentless lobbying of you to bring in more Res Park has driven you slightly mad at times, but I truly believe that you will make the right decision today. You have significant power and it needs to be used now for the better. In doing so, you will not only improve the lives of Redfern residents, but you will set a precedent to be bolder on the issue of Res Park across the city. Residents are crying out for Res Park, including in nearby Farris Street, and they will be given hope that one day soon they too will get what they need. On behalf of the people of Fishergate, as their councillor, I ask you to approve Res Park for the entirety of R66. Councillor Wilson and I will stand by you throughout this process, and we will be forever grateful that an executive member for Transport stood up for Fishergate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft, and thank you for bringing that perspective. Much appreciated, and I will take that into consideration. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to invite up Lucy Shaw for the next one.
Before me. Thank you so much for warming up the organ.
So just to say, I should have said before, you have 3 minutes, and if you like, I can give you a 30-second reminder before the end, or I'm happy to see. Okay.
So I guess following on from that,
Just press the mic button, please. Thank you. To turn screen. There you go. Thank you.
So following on from that, I guess you're now going to hear the resident view, which is of the same opinion, but hopefully perfectly aligns and puts even more weight behind this. However, firstly, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and raise my concerns of not progressing with the proposal. It's a no-brainer, as pointed out. The context is I've been a homeowner on Wellington Street for 8 years, and over that time, the scale of resident parking, non-residents parking in this area has significantly increased, and it's not necessarily driven by the obvious reasons. I'm not going to mention students. The main reasons for this increase are people parking on these streets to go to work or shopping in the city, long-term residents of Stay City, people attending events at the Barbican, people working on nearby construction sites, and people who live in nearby areas who have res parking in their area and either don't want to buy a pass or have multiple vehicles and don't want to buy more than one. This is despite there being an NCP at the end of the street and a queue park over the road. And I'm lucky, I live in an area with regular buses, like 2 park and rides, as well as other service buses being available. My request for this is not one driven by convenience. It's driven by safety, climate and community reasons. From a safety perspective, every morning I fear for my daughter's life as she gets on her bike to cycle up my street to Archbishop Holgate School. It is awful. In addition to that, there's many old people, young families who are leaving, trying to cross the road when there's like just too much volume of traffic, people not giving regard for each other in such a small space. Secondly, climate. Allowing this to continue is a clear contradiction of the Climate Council's ambitions. And as pointed out earlier, it's inconsistent with other areas. As again pointed out, there's just us and Farris Street. We stand out like a sore thumb. Lastly, community. You know in your paper that you don't support this proposal due to low response rate. This is due to significant increase in houses with multiple occupancy. And these residents obviously have a short-term focus because they'll only be here for a short space of time. However, those that did respond were in favour, the majority. And I'd just like you to think about it from those people who call this area home and want to enjoy this place safely today and in the future. For anyone in doubt as to whether this is the right decision, please feel free to go have a look at the situation any time of night or day. And lastly, just thank you again for giving me this chance to speak.
Thank you. That's really useful to hear your views, and I will take that into consideration. Thank you. I'd like to invite Pippa Cole up next. Pippa, it's the same. Do you want me to give you a 30-second? Yes. Okay. Just go when you're ready. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so just really to echo Councillor Whitcroft's and Lucy's comments as well. So I'm a long-term resident of Wellington Street. I've lived on the street for 20 years. And the parking has just got worse and worse over time. extremely disappointed by the recommendations in the report that was published last week, in terms of it stating that it doesn't receive sufficient support. Appreciating that a 50% response threshold is required. However, within the responses that were received, 116, which albeit translated to about a 25% rate, of those 116, 72 were in favour of implementing the scheme. And 44 were against. So that actually translates to roughly 2/3 of the residents who responded being in support of the scheme. Referring to Annex A, the consultation letter that was dated on 15th of January that was sent out. Yeah, again, it says that we require a 50% response rate, but there is the majority in the responses received. The 50% response threshold does seem completely arbitrary. I'm not quite sure sort of what the reasoning is behind that. And from recent press reports, BBC News on the 19th of September of this year and in York Mix on the 22nd of September of this year, there does seem to be an acknowledgement and recognition within the council that it doesn't work and that it does need reforming, which Councillor Whitcroft referred to as well. It does feel that we are unfairly penalised by living in an area that's both very close to the city centre and very close to the university. So there is a very, very high proportion of rental properties, largely students, but also holiday lets as well on the street. So it's pretty unattainable, really, essentially, to meet that 50% response threshold. Just in terms of some of the points that were picked up in the report, it's frustrating that in point 17 and point 33, there's the insinuation that residents believe or that commuters might be parking on the streets. I can tell you as a resident, they very much are. We watch them come and go daily. And it's not just commuters for work, like Lucy said, it's people visiting the city to go into the city for leisure. It's events at the Barbican. They come and go all hours and pretty much make the street unusable for residents. Point 16 refers to waste services not having any difficulty accessing the area. The issue isn't access, it's parking. So I think that's a little irrelevant because the refuse truck doesn't park. However, that leads me on to issues with access. So we know that the streets in the area, thank you. We know that the streets in the area are listed in various online forums and websites as having street parking. There is the reference as well in the letter that states that the resident scheme would prevent, as long as residents don't park on any existing restrictions which may be in place. We know that residents and commuters continuously park illegally on the street on double yellow lanes and do obstruct access to highway and private access. I, as a resident, do report illegal parking. I will get them ticketed, I don't hesitate. I've seen them continuously parking across access alleys that prevent residents accessing those private access areas. But essentially, residents are held hostage until those offending vehicles are moved. That also poses risk for emergency access as well, if emergency services need to access those residential areas. And in terms of affordability, I do think that the scheme is largely reasonably afforded. I do appreciate it's a significant cost to low-income families. However, it equates to just 30 pence per day. And I do think that it's implementing it, and that there's the reference at point 35 that people use in the street who are commuters and non-residents would have to use car parking or pay park and ride, but I do think that that's a good thing. You know, it echoes the sentiment about the environmental benefits of the scheme, and surely if they're forced to use council-run services in terms of park and ride and parking facilities, that can only be a good thing for the financial aspect as well. Again, I'd echo what Councillor Whitcroft and Lucy has said, is that the scheme should be approved and it should be enforced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Thank you. That's really useful, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, Andy de Gorn.
Thank you, and certainly endorse the passionate speech from Conrad. I am speaking as someone who's represented residents in this area over a period of about 20 years, and I can vouch for the fact that this has been a problem throughout that period of time. Annex F demonstrates the usual divergence of opinions on the scheme. However, it's clear from what you've heard that the scheme is no longer fit for purpose, particularly in areas like Heslington Road with a high student population, and this rule of thumb requirement, which is not set out in law. It's something that a previous council leader put in place about over a decade ago, in terms of responding to decisions about residents parking. The question about HMOs in the area, I know that the survey was actually done during a period when they were still on holiday. So even if they had been there, it's unlikely they would have responded. But nevertheless, that was the case. I understand it was sort of just after the Christmas break was when the survey forms went out. And a fairer approach would be to disregard non-responses from the HMOs and apply a simple majority, as we apply in our democratic process with local elections. In any case, the report is now at odds with the emerging transport strategy and the comments that Conrad made about the motion to council, a review of parking policy, where strong levers are needed to be applied to promote park and ride and reduce on-street parking, particularly on key bus routes like Heslington Road, which passes through the area. And I note that the recommendations looked at changing the parking regulations, which would help the university buses if that was applied. So I'd urge the executive member to strike out the no action recommendation, refer this back to officers to consider in the context of reducing commuter traffic, especially where bus routes close to the city centre are impacted by free on-street commuter parking. I would argue that all terrace streets within a mile of a city centre should have the same consistent policy, regardless of the level of HMOs within them, to be fairer to long-term residents, businesses, carers, bus users, all those who need to find somewhere to park or to pass along those roads.
30 seconds.
Finally, on a more general point, in support of a new transport policy, please can the council urgently start to deliver on measures to shift towards sustainable active travel and spend funds that you've got already. £1 million for city centre cycle parking upgrade, £1 million for active travel riverside route at Jubilee Terrace, which was awarded in 2023. 100,000 capability fund this year from Active Travel England, and we're now 6 months into the year, no sign of where it's being spent. And finally, something like £5 million of basic funds for desperately needed bus priority routes, such as near to where we are here between the station and Tower Street. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I will get on with spending money as well. Thank you, Andy. I also have Helen Durant on my list, but I don't think she's arrived. So if she arrives later, I'm happy to incorporate her in. But for now, we'll move on to the agenda items. So the first agenda item is item number 4, which we've had lots of public representation on. So this is to consider the results from the informal consultation on residents parking and limited waiting restrictions in the Heslington Road area known as R66 Wellington Street.
Yes,
So
I'll set some context before I hand over to Anne-Marie.
can you just introduce yourself as well?
So,
Do you introduce yourself?
I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Director for Environment, Transport and Planning. So before I hand over to Anne-Marie, I'll just give some context. So the changes to residents parking is a 2-stage process. We have an informal process first, and this first stage is a discretionary process, but it allows us to develop proposals which respond to residents' requirements. So sometimes there may be equality implications, access implications that come out, which mean that what we then go to formal consultation on changes. It also, as has been discussed, indicates a level of support for any proposed restrictions. This report is just indicating the results of the first stage of informal consultation. The 50% is a guide for officers in making the recommendation for the report. I just want to stress that it does not constrain your decision. Your decision, you have complete discretion over whether to proceed to the next stage. You don't need to refer it back to officers, as Andy de Gorn has referenced. You can just make a decision to move straight to the statutory consultation. Should you wish to move to formal consultation, what then happens is it's not a 50% cut-off process. It's the legal process, which is where we need to consider the objections. And the next report is actually on the agenda. The next report is actually a version of that bit of the process where we consider the objections. If we don't consider those objections in an appropriate way, then that's when we will face the legal challenge point. So I think just in terms of the context and the process, it's useful just to set that scene. I'll hand over to Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie Howarth, transport. I think James has said most of it. The report was to consider the representations received at the informal stage. And due to the low responses was the reason why the officer recommendation was no further action. And there was very limited number of written representations received as well, and they was very even for and against the proposals. Again, which is why the no further action was recommended at this stage.
Thank you. So I've had a good look at this proposal. I think the important thing here is that a low response rate can't be interpreted either way in terms of we don't know whether the people who didn't respond support or don't support. So given that the people who did respond, the majority of those are in support and around 1/3 of them opposed it, I feel that we've at the best guess is that people in this area are supportive of this scheme. For me, there's a number of things to consider here. There's obviously the people living in this area and their ability to access their homes by whatever means of transport they're using. And I know from when I've been through this area myself, it's very congested and it's very difficult to walk, cycle, use the bus or drive in this area. So I think from a resident's perspective, implementing a res park will improve their environment, their street environment, the place they live. On top of that, from a point of view of our transport strategy, we aim to reduce car use by 2030 by 20% by 2030, reduce driven miles, and part of that will be to discourage people driving into the city centre to park for work, for shopping, for staying at the hotel, and instead encourage them to use sustainable means of transport, bus, cycle, walk, and so on, or to use our paid for car parks. So from the point of view of our transport strategy, this is one of the few areas that is so close to the city centre where there is currently free on-street car parking. And that's inconsistent with what we have across the rest of the city. So for all of those reasons, I think this is ready to go to the next stage of the formal consultation. The one thing I want to ask is I'm concerned about the level of parking suggested on Heslington Road, because that's a key bus route to the university, and I know that it's quite difficult for buses to squeeze through those parked cars, especially when there's something else coming the other way. And for cyclists going up the hill, as one of our speakers mentioned, having to move out around a lot of parked cars on an uphill stretch is far from ideal and feels very dangerous and makes you feel very vulnerable. So two questions I'd like to ask. The parking that's proposed at the uppermost point of Heslington Road, closest to St Lawrence School, I noticed that on the opposite side of the road, there are proposed additional double yellow lines. Would it be possible to consider switching that around so that the double yellow lines were on the uphill side and the parking was on the downhill side, so that if you're going uphill, you have a straight run uphill without having to move out around parked cars? Will that slow down the consultation process?
The only problem you've got with that is it is an existing lay-by area, so it's more designed for parking.
So are they
And that's in front of the actual properties, whereas opposite, there isn't any properties there.
right? Yeah, but so from recollection, there is actually parking. You have to shift out around parked cars when you're going up that hill. So I don't think all of them are tucked into the lay-by. I might be wrong. But I suppose my request is, can that be looked at before we go out to formal consultation?
So they are in a lay-by off the main carriageway, parking on the north side at that end of Heslington Road. So if you wanted to swap it over, you'd be putting the parking onto the carriageway and slewing the.
Right, they are all in a lay-by, are they? Okay. All right, I will, yeah, I'll go and have a look, because I have a recollection that some of them are on the street, but possibly that's higher up the hill and outside of this zone. And then my other request is that if we get to the stage of implementing this, I would want to immediately review the parking on Heslington Road in terms of how well used it is, such that we can consider reducing the amount of parking on Heslington Road and making it easier for the passage of buses and for those people who are cycling on that route. So that would be a kind of subsequent to having implemented it, when we understand the level of need for parking in the area. So with those two sort of reservations, I'd certainly like this to go forward to the next stage of consultation. Okay, right, we will move on to the next agenda item. So next agenda item is number 5, Mansfield Street Traffic Regulation Order Consultation.
So as I just alluded to, this is the second stage in that two-stage process of changing the traffic regulation order. So this doesn't have that reference to 50% in. This is just now about considering the objections to what's proposed. And as you will see in the paper, we've tried to address those objections, which is an important part of the legal process in terms of whether we implement or not.
Morning.
Morning.
As James was saying, we've tried to address it. As you can see in Annex A, there is a lot of unrestricted parking area on Mansfield Street at the moment. And as you know, there's been a lot of development going on there as well, with the 2 student accommodations. So what we've tried to do is address the objections that was received. One was actually by Urbanite, who requested it originally, who wanted us to continue with it on the south side, but then also to continue with no waiting Monday to Saturday 8 till 6 PM on the north side. I think that's a good balance of.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the work that's gone into this and for that achieving that balance. So having looked at this is another case of an anomaly of free parking very close to the city centre, which obviously gets used for all sorts of reasons. And I very much understand that in this case, it's based around access to the end of the street and that being compromised by parking on the street, but also recognise that there is a gym in the area and they would like to retain some parking for their customers, particularly in the evening. So this seems a reasonable compromise and I'm very happy to go ahead with this. The one question I've got is how quickly are we able to implement it, given that the problems with access are occurring now whilst the development is going on?
We just need to put the notice of making in place and then instruct the lining contractors, because the single yellow line is already in place and the signage is there for that current restriction. As quickly as it can be to send it through to the lining contractors.
Yeah, great, because I think obviously this is one where it's having an impact right now and it'd be good to progress it. Thank you. So yeah, I'm happy to approve this one. So the next one is Stockton Lane, Seymour Grove, Traffic Regulation Orders Consultation.
So as you may remember, this is one which we previously considered and we deferred whilst we went away and did some work on this. So this is the follow-up report having undertaken that work.
Yeah, when you deferred the decision in May, it was to contact the resident that made the representation at the time to consider if they needed a disabled parking bay installing outside the house. They wouldn't qualify for a bay because they have off-street parking amenity for 2 vehicles already. We did discuss a lesser restriction, which is Annex D, But whilst it addresses the issue of a visibility split exiting Seymour Grove, it doesn't address the issue of the ongoing footpath parking and parking on the carriageway leading to vehicles approaching the roundabout in the centre of the carriageway. So we ask you to recommend the original proposal.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for going back to the resident and exploring alternative options. Having looked at this again, my understanding is that there is available parking not too far away. Can you confirm that there is available parking in Seymour Grove for
There's
the
parking in
residents?
Seymour Grove, and then there'll be unrestricted parking about 40 metres away from where the residents.
So for visitors, there is relatively nearby parking, and they would be presumably able to drop off outside their house for anybody who needed to become.
You can drop off and cut on double yellow lines, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel that that's a proportionate adjustment to make, and that in this case, implementing this traffic regulation order is important in terms of its being a bus route, so wanting to facilitate the passage of the buses, and also for the safety of people cycling, not having to manoeuvre out around parked cars. So yeah, I am happy to go with the recommendation and approve this traffic regulation order.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one on the agenda here is item number 7, the proposed diversion and upgrade of public footpath in Acaster Malbis.
Yeah, so just a very quick introduction, sorry. So yes, this is, I suppose, a different bit of legal process in terms of how we divert a public right of way. This is obviously timely, given that public right of way is currently obstructed. So there are definite advantages to this. I'll hand over to Alison and Laura.
Hi there. So my name's Lauren Grindley, standing in for Russell Valley for the Public Rights of Way team. The summary of the report is to divert and upgrade public footpath in Acaster Malbis to a public right of way, which has come an opportunity because the caravan park is being redeveloped. The diversion would be under section 119 of the Highways Act, and it would then be a more open and more accessible route, as well as being open to cyclists and right of way users on horseback as well.
I just had one question. When this route is, if it was to become a bridleway, would it also then permit vehicle access through? Is it wide enough to permit vehicle access through?
Okay, so the route of the proposed diversion is onto an access track, which is being put in place by the owners of the caravan park, but we don't anticipate there being any more access by vehicles than there is at the moment, which is already very, very rare. And it is the route that's already been used, and we haven't received any sort of complaints or concerns to the council about the conflict between users.
So I just wanted to check it doesn't open up a new vehicle route, the last part of it that connects to the road. Would it then create a new route that vehicles could use that doesn't exist currently, where it's got A and B on the map?
No, not necessarily, because the starts and ends of the route are not changing from their current position, but to combat if there was unauthorised vehicle access in the future, we have spoken with the landowners about putting a gate in the order, so that's in the definitive statement and authorised by the Public Rights of Way team. If that were to become a problem in the future, they can then have a bridleway gate to reduce any vehicle access.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm very happy to approve this decision and allow this diversion to be created. Thank you. So that's all the items on the agenda. Is there any urgent business that anyone wants to raise? Thank you. In that case, I will close the meeting. Thank you, everyone.